Have you ever noticed that if you make a wrong turn in your car, right, a calm digital voice just instantly recalculates your route?
Oh, yeah. Make a U-turn at the next light.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's so clinical. It's precise. You just turn around and immediately you're back on track.
Right.
But when you make a wrong turn in your life, when you step into the realm of the human soul, into questions of, purpose or faith or meaning, that spiritual GPS just goes completely blank.
It really does. There's no voice telling you to turn around.
No. You're just left standing there looking around at modern life, completely overwhelmed, wondering, how did I get here? And more importantly, how do I find my way back?
It's an incredibly disorienting feeling, and honestly, it's one that almost everyone experiences at some point.
Yeah.
We love having a definite map. We want clear coordinates, so when that's stripped away, you're left navigating a spiritual landscape that is, wow, it's incredibly murky.
Definitely.
You don't really know if you're walking toward an oasis or if you're just wandering deeper into the desert.
Which is exactly the tension we're exploring today on this deep dive. We are opening up a massive, highly detailed theological and philosophical blueprint.
And it's quite the blueprint.
It really is. It claims to be the original ancient recalculation route for the human soul. We're diving deep into a text by author Rian Engelbrecht titled The Way of the Lord, Part 1.
Yes.
And, whether you consider yourself deeply religious or a student of philosophy or just someone trying to make sense of the modern human condition and why we all feel so exhausted, this text has a profound diagnosis of why we feel so lost.
It really does. Engelbrecht's core argument is it's a profound call to return to what he terms the ancient paths.
The ancient paths, right?
Yeah. Today we're going to decode how he uses the ancient physical tabernacle from the Old Testament as a literal, a psychological and spiritual map for human growth.
Which is fascinating.
And we're going to unravel one of theology's most complex paradoxes, the difference between God's sovereign will and his commanded will.
Oh, that part is, that answers a lot of questions about why the world looks the way it does.
Exactly.
But before we get into the heavy architecture of the tabernacle or those paradoxes of divine will, I want to establish some ground rules for our conversation today.
Good idea.
Our objective here isn't to preach or to take a religious side. That's not what we do. We are here to impartially explore Engelbrecht's philosophical and theological frameworks exactly as he presents them.
Right. We're just looking at the mechanics of his arguments.
Exactly. We want to examine why he believes this massive paradigm shift is absolutely essential for modern humanity, regardless of where you might personally stand on the theological spectrum.
And that's a crucial distinction to make. We are looking at this text as a structural map of human spirituality.
Right.
Engelbrecht is essentially arguing that modern society is spiritually lost, we're anxious, we're disconnected, and it's precisely because we've prioritized consumerism, our own egos, and our self-will over this ancient divine order.
And he builds this entire foundational argument on a really striking image from the book of Jeremiah, right? Specifically Jeremiah 6.16.
Yes, the crossroads.
Right. The verse talks about standing at the crossroads, looking for the ancient paths or the good way, and finding rest for your soul. But the kicker, the really tragic end of that verse, is the people looking at that ancient path and responding, we will not walk in it.
Yeah, that imagery of the crossroads is the perfect starting point because it represents a choice that every person has to make, often daily,
Yeah, for sure.
Engelbrecht sets up a really stark dichotomy here. On one side, you have the highway of the Lord, which is this ancient, unchanging path of divine order. Okay. And on the other side, you have what he calls byways.
Byways, right?
Yeah, and these byways are created by modern religion, humanism, and, our cultural obsession with constant progress.
And these byways are incredibly seductive, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely.
They're disguised as spiritual enlightenment or personal growth. It's the pursuit of money, status, self-gratification, but it's wrapped in a veneer of purpose.
Exactly.
Let me just think of an analogy. It's like modern society is a driver who stubbornly ignores the main paved highway because they want to find a clever shortcut.
Yes.
They see a dirt path that looks scenic or they think they know better than the map, and they just keep turning off the main road.
And what happens? I mean, they eventually end up hopelessly lost in the woods, right? The car is out of gas, the sun is going down, and they're wondering why the journey is so agonizingly exhausting.
Right.
Engelbrecht is looking at modern humanity with all our anxiety, our burnout, our existential dread, and he's saying, stop looking for the shortcut. Your clever byways are killing you. Go back to the ancient highway.
So to explain where this desperate human desire for shortcuts comes from, he actually traces the behavior all the way back to the ultimate ancient origin story.
The Garden of Eden.
Exactly. And this is where I actually want to push back on his premise a little bit. Because he sets up a contrast between two trees that challenges the very foundation of modern secular thought.
He contrasts the tree of life with the tree of knowledge of good and evil.
Right. And in his framework, the tree of life represents divine union, spiritual reality, finding your complete sustenance in the Creator.
Yeah, it's a state of being where you don't need to figure everything out because you're entirely connected to the source of all things.
Okay, right. But then he looks at the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and he frames it as the ultimate spiritual poison.
Yes, he does.
And, I mean, in our modern world, the tree of knowledge sounds like the goal of human existence.
It does sound like that, yeah.
Like human progress is literally based on seeking new knowledge.
Yeah.
The scientific method, philosophy, medical advancements, technology, it all comes from the pursuit of knowing more. So why does Engelbrecht view this tree of knowledge so negatively? Isn't wanting to know the difference between good and evil and wanting to understand the mechanics of the universe a fundamentally positive human trait?
It's the natural modern objection, for sure. But to understand Engelbrecht's stance, you have to look really closely at how he defines the specific type of knowledge that tree represents.
Okay, walk me through that.
Well, he isn't saying that learning how to build a bridge or cure a disease is evil. That's not it at all.
Right.
He's arguing that with God, nothing is new. God is the Ancient of Days.
Right.
Therefore, true ultimate wisdom isn't about humans inventing new moral philosophies or, trying to uncover some magical mystery to hack the universe.
It's not a condemnation of empirical fact.
Exactly. True wisdom is rediscovering the ancient reality of being united with the Creator.
So it's a condemnation of trying to source your own reality.
Yes. In this theological framework, the tree of knowledge represents mankind attempting to become self-gods.
Oh.
It's the birth of the human ego. It is humanity looking at the divine and saying, I don't need your revelation. I don't need to be dependent on you. I can figure out the universe, morality, and purpose using purely my own intellect.
Just completely detached from the spirit.
Exactly. Using my flesh and my soul, detached from your spirit.
It's the ultimate declaration of independence, which, sounds heroic in a movie. But Engelbrecht argues it's actually fatal.
He argues it leads directly to spiritual death because it severs the cord to the actual source of life.
Wow.
When you eat from the tree of knowledge, you are essentially saying, I will be the supreme ruler of my own existence. But the human soul wasn't designed to bear the weight of supreme rulership.
No, we definitely aren't equipped to be gods.
We aren't. And when we try, we buckle under the immense psychological and spiritual pressure.
Okay, that perfectly explains his critique of the modern consumer mindset then. Even when it comes to faith and spirituality. If we are acting as our own little gods, then we treat religion like a product we're shopping for.
Oh, absolutely. Just think about how the average person approaches spirituality today. It's treated exactly like a supermarket. Yeah. You walk down the aisle of ideas with your shopping cart. You throw in a little bit of Eastern meditation because it helps you sleep.
Right.
You toss in some traditional Christian liturgy because the aesthetic feels grounding. You add a heavy dose of modern self-help manifestation because you want a promotion at work.
It's a designer spirituality.
Exactly. You build this Frankenstein spirituality that perfectly suits your exact lifestyle and offends none of your personal preferences.
And Engelbrecht is fiercely critical of this. He essentially says, we are trying to fit God into our tiny, anxious byways, rather than submitting ourselves and fitting into his ancient order.
Yes, we want the benefits of the divine without the surrender.
Right. And he even quotes 1 Timothy about the love of money being a root of all evils, pointing out how this consumer craving leads people to wander from the faith and pierce themselves with, what was the phrase? Acute mental pangs.
Acute mental pangs. That is a brutal but really accurate diagnosis of modern anxiety.
It really is.
When you are the god of your own universe, every failure is apocalyptic. If your career stumbles, Your entire cosmos collapses because your career was the foundation of your self-made reality.
Because you're the one holding it all up.
Exactly. Engelbrecht is saying our anxiety is the natural byproduct of trying to manage a universe we didn't create.
Okay, so the diagnosis is clear. We are exhausted, we are anxious, we are stuck on these dead-end dirt roads of our own making because we keep eating from the tree of knowledge, trying to be the architects of our own salvation.
Precisely.
So the immediate question then becomes, how do we get back onto the ancient highway? And what I find genuinely fascinating about Engelbrecht's text is that he doesn't just offer abstract, airy-fairy philosophical advice.
No, he doesn't.
He points to a highly detailed, massive physical blueprint from the Old Testament.
He points directly to the Tabernacle of Moses.
Which honestly blew my mind, because if you've ever tried to read through the book of Exodus, you hit these chapters that are just endless lists of architectural dimensions.
Oh, yeah. Cubits of this, talents of that.
Exactly. Cubits of linen, clasps of gold, bronze rings, acacia wood, animal sacrifices. It can feel incredibly dry. It's like reading the assembly instructions for a divine piece of IKEA furniture.
That's a great way to put it.
But Engelbrecht says, no, look closer. Stop reading it as history and start reading it as a map. This physical tent in the desert is a literal, step-by-step, psychological and spiritual map for human progression.
It's a phenomenal way to decode the text, really. He proposes that the Old Testament tabernacle isn't just a historical artifact. It is the physical blueprint for New Testament spiritual growth.
Okay.
It maps the exact journey a human soul must take to move from the chaotic external world into the absolute deepest presence of God. And this map is laid out across 3 very distinct zones.
Right, the outer court, the holy place, and the Holy of Holies. To make this relatable, I kept thinking about it like the concentric circles of intimacy we have in our own homes and relationships.
I like that analogy.
Think about the layout of your house.
Right.
The outer court is like your front yard or your porch. It's public. It's introductory.
Yeah.
You might wave to a neighbor there or accept a package from a delivery driver. Mm-hmm. You are interacting, but it's very surface level.
Right.
Then you step inside the front door to the holy place. This is your living room. You invite your friends there. You have consistent fellowship. You share meals. You have deeper conversations. But it's still somewhat curated.
And then there is the third zone.
Right. The Holy of Holies, that is your private sanctuary. Maybe it's your bedroom or a locked private study. It's a place of ultimate vulnerability where only the most intimate union happens, completely shielded from the outside world.
That analogy maps perfectly onto Engelbrecht's spiritual breakdown. Let's walk through this blueprint step by step, exactly as he lays it out, because the mechanics of this journey are crucial.
Okay, let's do it.
The journey begins in the outer court. In theological terms, this represents justification.
And let's define justification so we don't get lost in the jargon.
Sure. In the legal sense, justification means your debts are cleared. You are declared righteous. But psychologically, in this map, it's the starting line of ego death.
Ego death.
Yeah. When you walk through the gate into the outer court, the very first massive object you encounter is the bronze altar of sacrifice. You literally cannot bypass it.
Wow, okay.
In the Christian framework, this represents the cross of Christ, but on a personal level, it represents the death of the old self.
Which is incredibly confronting. You don't walk into the spiritual journey and immediately get handed a harp and a cloud. You walk in and you are handed a knife.
You have to put your ego on the altar.
And practically speaking, in our modern world, what does that look like? It means when someone insults you at work, your ego wants to retaliate and destroy them, but you let that desire die on the altar.
Yes.
When your social media post doesn't get likes and your self-worth starts to plummet, you have to let that vanity die.
Precisely. It is the violent shedding of the self-God mentality we picked up at the Tree of Knowledge. And right past that altar of sacrifice is the second item in the outer court, the bronze laver.
Laver, right.
This was a massive basin of water where the priests had to wash their hands and feet before they could proceed any further.
And Engelbrecht associates this with repentance and the daily washing in the Word.
Yes. The mechanism here is vital. The altar is where you surrender your life, but the laver is the acknowledgement that even after you've surrendered, walking through the dusty world gets you dirty.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
You pick up the anxieties, the fears, the toxic inputs of the culture around you. The laver represents the daily psychological necessity of cleansing your mind.
You have to actively wash away the doom scrolling, the envy, the bitterness you accumulate just by existing in a fallen world.
It's mental hygiene, really. Now, Engelbrecht notes that this outer court is essential. Every believer has to start here. But, and this is where he levels a massive critique at modern religion, he warns that the vast majority of people get completely stuck in the outer court.
They get stuck in the front yard.
Exactly.
They treat the front yard like it's the entire destination.
Yeah.
They sacrifice a little bit of their time, they wash their conscience, they feel a momentary sense of forgiveness, and then they leave.
Yes.
And they come back the next Sunday, they feel a little guilty, they mentally put something on the altar, they wash, and they leave. They're caught in this endless loop of behavioral modification, but they never actually step inside the house.
And if you stay in the outer court, you are still exposed to the elements, you are still buffeted by the winds of the culture. To find actual rest, you have to transition into the second zone, the holy place.
Okay.
Theologically, this represents sanctification.
Another big churchy word. Break down sanctification for us.
Sanctification is the friction of habit building. It is the how of transformation. You don't permanently change your entire identity overnight just because you visited the altar in the outer court.
Right, that's just the start.
Exactly. Sanctification is the daily grinding work of unlearning your ego and relearning divine order. It's inside the actual tent of the tabernacle. And inside this room, there are 3 distinct pieces of furniture, each representing a deeper level of spiritual maturity.
Okay, so first you have the table of showbread.
Yes. The bread symbolizes feeding on the Word of God. But Engelbrecht points out it's not just about hoarding knowledge. It's about taking that sustenance and feeding others. It represents true spiritual community and discipleship. It's moving from being a consumer to being a provider.
And then directly across from the bread, you have the golden lampstand or the menorah.
The lampstand represents illumination. Remember, there are no windows in this tent. The only light comes from the oil burning in the menorah. Psychologically, this represents being guided by the Holy Spirit and divine wisdom, rather than relying on the natural light of your own human intellect.
So it's learning to see reality through God's perspective, not your own.
Exactly. And finally, standing right in front of the heavy veil at the back of the room is the altar of incense.
The incense.
This represents constant, fragrant prayer, worship, and intercession. It's the posture of a mind that is continually communicating with the divine. And Engelbrecht emphasizes a critical detail here that ties back to his critique of consumer faith.
What's that?
The fire on the lampstand and the bread on the table had to be continual.
Wait, so it wasn't an event? It wasn't just a Sunday morning service?
Exactly. The priest didn't just set up the bread, light the fire, and then lock up the tent and go home for the week. The fire had to be tended every morning and every evening.
Wow.
It represents a daily, unceasing surrender and fellowship. Sanctification is a full-time occupation.
But incredibly, as deep and demanding as the holy place is, it still isn't the final destination. The ultimate goal of the ancient path, the core of the map, is the third zone, the Holy of Holies.
Yes.
And this zone represents glorification or absolute intimacy.
To understand the gravity of the Holy of Holies, you have to understand the veil. In the Old Testament, a massive, incredibly thick curtain separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies.
Right.
Only the high priest could go behind it, and only once a year under really strict conditions. But, as Engelbrecht points out, under the New Covenant, the crucifixion of Jesus physically tore the veil in the temple from top to bottom.
Meaning that this ultimate level of access is now granted to everyone. It's not just for an elite priestly class. You, listening to this right now, have an open invitation to walk into the Holy of Holies.
But walking in requires a terrifying level of vulnerability. Inside the Holy of Holies, there is no furniture to do things with. There is no bread to eat, no lamps to tend.
Nothing to hide behind.
Oh, nothing. There is only the Ark of the Covenant, covered by the mercy seat. There is absolutely no natural light, and there is no artificial light from the lampstand.
So what illuminates the room?
The only illumination in that room is the raw, unfiltered, manifest presence of God, what the ancient texts call the Shekinah glory.
So in the outer court, you are dealing with your sins. In the holy place, you're doing the work of ministry and habit building. But in the Holy of Holies, you aren't doing anything.
No.
You are just existing in absolute union with the Creator. You are completely exposed to the divine reality.
You aren't just enjoying God's gifts anymore. You are experiencing God himself. And this brings Engelbrecht to a piercing observation about human nature.
What's that?
He asks, if the veil is torn and the ultimate presence of God is available, why do so few people ever enter the Holy of Holies?
And his answer is devastating.
Yeah.
He says we don't go in because stepping into the Holy of Holies requires the final, complete, absolute death of the ego.
You cannot take your pride into that room. You cannot take your worldly ambitions, your self-righteousness, or your self-God mentality from the tree of knowledge into the raw presence of the Ancient of Days.
It just wouldn't survive.
The sheer reality of God burns all of that away. And frankly, most people love their egos too much to let them burn.
We like the gifts of the outer court. We like the feeling of forgiveness at the altar. We like the illumination of the lampstand, the warm community of the bread. But we stop at the torn veil, because to step through it means we have to stop being the main character in our own story.
It's a profound challenge to the reader. It asks you to look honestly at your own spiritual journey. Are you satisfied with surface-level participation?
Yeah.
Are you content to just check boxes and do religious chores in the holy place? Or are you willing to do the excruciatingly hard work of internal surrender to reach the core of who you were designed to be?
And this leads us to a massive, unresolved tension in the text. Because if the ultimate goal is to step into the Holy of Holies and completely surrender to whatever God's plan is, what happens when God's plan contradicts what we want?
That's the big question.
Or, even more confusingly, what happens when we look at the world around us and see disease, corruption, and chaos? If we're supposed to surrender to a God who is entirely sovereign and in control, why is the world such a mess? If he's in charge, why isn't it fixed?
This is perhaps the most intellectually fascinating part of Engelbrecht's entire book. He tackles the paradox of God's will.
Okay, let's get into this.
This is a theological knot that has tripped up philosophers and believers for centuries. How can an all-powerful God allow a broken world? Engelbrecht untangles this by clearly separating God's will into two distinct working categories: the sovereign will and the commanded will.
Okay, we need to define these with absolute clarity, because everything else he says hinges on this distinction. Let's start with the sovereign will.
The sovereign will, which theologians sometimes call the will of decree, is God's overarching macroscopic plan for the universe. It is the absolute architecture of reality.
Unbreakable.
Yes. It cannot be broken, it cannot be thwarted, and it will always come to pass, regardless of human action or demonic interference.
Give me some examples of sovereign will.
The creation of the universe was a sovereign will. The decree that Jesus would be crucified to save humanity was a sovereign will. The decree that the Israelites would ultimately inhabit the Promised Land was a sovereign will. It is the unstoppable tide of history as dictated by the Creator.
Okay, that makes sense. God is the boss, what he says goes. But then we have the second category, the commanded will.
Right. The commanded will represents God's moral instructions for how humans should live their daily lives. The 10 Commandments, instructions on sexual purity, the command to love your neighbor, to live in peace, to care for the poor.
Okay.
These are the blueprints for optimal human flourishing.
And here is the paradox. Unlike the sovereign will, which is unbreakable, the commanded will is broken by humans constantly, every single minute of every single day, because God gave us free will.
Exactly. And this is where people get incredibly confused. They look at a tragic event, a murder, a war, a famine, and they say, well, God is in control, so it must have been God's will.
Yeah, you hear that all the time.
Right. But Engelbrecht strongly rejects that lazy theological shortcut. He argues that God often hates what is happening on earth because humanity is violently rebelling against his commanded will.
I have to step in here and push back on behalf of the listener, because my brain is tying itself in knots.
Go for it.
If God is completely sovereign, meaning he is all-powerful and his sovereign will always gets done, but humans are constantly breaking his commanded will and making him unhappy, how do those two things coexist? How does the sovereign will get accomplished if the actors in the play are constantly ruining the script?
It is the perfect question, and it's the core of the paradox. To resolve this, you have to understand the mechanism of how the two wills interact. Okay. Engelbrecht proves, using stark textual examples, that sometimes human beings breaking the commanded will is the exact mechanism that fulfills the sovereign will.
Wait, really?
Yes. God's sovereignty is so absolute that he can weave human rebellion into his ultimate decree.
Okay, I need an analogy. Help me visualize this interaction.
Think about a massive, complex video game. You're a gamer, right?
I am. I spent way too many hours in open-world RPGs.
Perfect. Think of the sovereign will like the foundational, unbreakable physics engine of the video game, specifically gravity.
Gravity, okay.
Gravity is decreed by the programmer. It is absolute. It cannot be altered, paused, or negotiated with by the player. Now, the commanded will is the glowing, suggested path on the ground that the game provides to help the player safely navigate the level and reach the objective.
So the programmer is saying, walk here, jump here, avoid the lava.
Exactly. Now, the player has complete free will. They can completely ignore the suggested path. They can turn around, run in the opposite direction, and purposefully jump off the edge of a massive cliff. They have brazenly broken the commanded will. But the moment they step off that cliff, the sovereign will gravity takes over and ensures the ultimate inevitable outcome.
Oh, wow.
The programmer didn't want the player to fall. They provided a perfectly safe path. But the player chose to rebel, and the programmer's overarching rules of reality still govern the universe.
Oh, that is brilliant. So the player is entirely responsible for ignoring the path and taking the falling damage, but the programmer's reality remains absolute. The game isn't out of control just because the player is acting like a lunatic?
Exactly. The sovereign will accommodates the free will of the commanded will without being threatened by it. Now, let's apply this mechanism to the biblical texts Engelbrecht uses. Look at the ultimate example, the crucifixion of Jesus.
Okay, let's walk through the mechanics of that.
The sovereign will of God, determined from the foundation of the world, was that Jesus would die to redeem mankind. That was the unbreakable decree. But to make that physical event happen on earth, human beings had to act. King Herod, Pontius Pilate, the Roman soldiers, the religious leaders, they all had to commit murder, bear false witness, yield to political cowardice, and act in deep corruption.
They violently broke the commanded will. God's command is clearly, thou shalt not kill, and they killed the Son of God.
Yes, they sinned egregiously. God hated the sin of the murder, the torture, the injustice. But their rebellion, their breaking of the commanded will, was the exact mechanism that fulfilled God's sovereign will of redemption.
That is wild.
God didn't force them to sin their own egos, did that. But his sovereign plan was large enough to encompass their rebellion and use it for ultimate victory.
That is mind-bending, but it makes so much sense.
Yeah.
He also brings up the story of the Israelites wandering in the desert for 40 years as a case study of this tension, right?
It's another perfect example of the friction between the two wills. Moses knew the sovereign will. God decreed that the nation of Israel will inhabit the land of Canaan. That is a fixed point in history. But on the journey there, the people completely, repeatedly reject the commanded will. God says, trust me, and they build a golden calf. God says, have faith, and they complain they want to go back to slavery in Egypt. They fall into idolatry and constant rebellion.
So what happens? Does God cancel the sovereign will?
No, the sovereign will remains. Israel does eventually enter Canaan, but Engelbrecht points out that the generation that rebelled suffered, died, and wandered in a scorching desert for 40 agonizing years.
Wow.
They didn't wander because God's sovereign plan failed. They wandered because they stubbornly refused to align their daily choices with his commanded will.
They made their own lives miserable by constantly fighting the grain of reality. They kept jumping off the video game cliff and complaining about the falling damage.
Yes.
And this leads to a really sobering modern extrapolation in the text. Engelbrecht talks about what he calls the curse of the unnatural. And he uses a very bizarre story from the New Testament to explain it. The story of Jesus cursing the withered fig tree.
The fig tree narrative often confuses people because it seems so out of character. Jesus is hungry, he sees a fig tree that has leaves but no fruit, and he curses it. The tree immediately withers and dies.
Yeah, it always felt a bit petty to me.
Right, but Engelbrecht uses this to explain the mechanics of a curse. He explains that it wasn't God's sovereign will or his inherent vindictive desire to destroy a piece of his own creation.
So why did it die?
Because the tree was designed, it was commanded by its very nature to bear fruit. When it failed to operate according to its natural commanded purpose, it essentially invited a curse upon itself.
Oh, I see.
A curse, in Engelbrecht's view, isn't a lightning bolt thrown by an angry God. A curse is the natural consequence of stepping outside the protective umbrella of your created design.
And the author applies this directly to modern humanity, doesn't he? He argues that when we operate outside of God's design, when we exchange divine truth for our own egos, when we act unnaturally regarding moral laws or family structures or how we treat the poor, we aren't just breaking arbitrary old-fashioned rules.
No, we aren't.
We are stepping out from under the umbrella of divine protection. We invite what he calls the four horses of the apocalypse: plagues, wars, societal breakdown, massive economic anxiety into our lives as a natural consequence.
It's just cause and effect.
It makes me think of putting the wrong fuel in a car. If you try to run a diesel engine on unleaded gas, the engine is going to completely break down. The engine isn't breaking down because the mechanic is punishing you from afar. It's breaking down because you violated the design of the engine. You operated outside the commanded will of the manufacturer.
That is a perfect synthesis. The curse is the natural consequence of stepping outside the commanded will. So, the ultimate goal of a believer, the entire point of walking the ancient path, is to align your free will so tightly with the commanded will that you walk smoothly within the sovereign will, avoiding the 40 years of desert wandering.
Which is an incredible transition into the practical application of this book. Because it is one thing to sit here and understand all this theology theoretically. We can map out the tabernacle and debate the two wills all day. But it's another thing entirely to actually do it on a Tuesday morning when your boss is screaming at you, your car just broke down, and your bank account is overdrawn.
Exactly.
If breaking the commanded will leads to a life of wandering and anxiety, how do we actively, practically align ourselves with it in the real world? Engelbrecht points to 3 practical pillars for the modern believer: righteousness, faith, and the Sabbath rest.
Let's start with the first pillar, righteousness, because Engelbrecht completely redefines this word for the modern reader.
I always thought righteousness just meant being a morally good person. Don't lie on your taxes, don't steal, help old ladies cross the street.
Right.
Or on the negative side, being self-righteous, which just means being a judgmental hypocrite.
Right.
But Engelbrecht strips that definition all the way down to the studs. He argues it has almost nothing to do with a moral checklist.
He strips away all the legalistic baggage. Engelbrecht defines righteousness strictly as being an absolute harmonious alignment with God's thoughts, ways, and order. It is not about keeping a tally of good deeds to prove your worth. It's about tuning your internal instrument to the exact pitch of the Creator. If God says a certain behavior is destructive, you agree with him, even if culture says it's liberating.
Wow.
If God says a path is right, you walk it, even if it costs you financially. Righteousness is the state of agreeing with the architecture of reality.
And staying in that alignment requires the second pillar, faith. But Engelbrecht doesn't mean a passive sit in the pews and wait for heaven kind of faith. He demands a highly practical, dirt under your fingernails faith.
He really does.
There's an illustrative anecdote he references that I think perfectly captures the danger of theoretical passive religion. It's the classic parable of the man sitting on the roof of his house during a massive flood.
Oh, the man who refuses help because he's waiting for a miracle.
Right. The water is rising rapidly. The guy comes by in a rowboat and says, "Hop in, I'll save you." The man on the roof says, "No, I have faith. I'm waiting for God to supernaturally save me." The water gets higher, up to his waist. A rescue helicopter hovers overhead and drops a ladder. The pilot yells, "Grab the ladder!" The man waves it off. "No, God will save me."
And we know how it ends.
Eventually, the water overtops the roof and the man drowns. He gets to heaven, totally indignant, and asks God, "I had so much faith, why didn't you save me?" And God looks at him and says, "I sent you a boat and a helicopter. What were you waiting for?"
It's a humorous story, but Engelbrecht uses it to point out a lethal spiritual flaw. He highlights the extreme danger of being so heavenly minded that you are absolutely no earthly good.
Right.
True faith isn't waiting for God to magically suspend the laws of physics to solve your problems. True faith is recognizing God's provision in the practical tools he places in front of you.
He insists that faith must manifest in practical stewardship. And this is where he introduces what I thought was one of the most brilliant concepts in the book, the feudalism of our faith. He uses medieval economic structures to explain our spiritual posture.
Yes. In the medieval feudal system, you have the ultimate landowner, the king or the lord. He owns everything. Then you have the vassals.
The vassals.
Right. The vassals are the stewards who are given dominion over a specific plot of land. Their job is to work the land, protect it, manage the resources, and yield fruit for the lord. They have authority, but they are not the owners.
Okay.
Engelbrecht argues that God is the ultimate landowner of reality, and humans are his appointed vassals.
So our job is to manage the earth practically. We're supposed to be healing the sick, helping the poor, working our corporate jobs with integrity, building up society, raising our kids. We are managing the estate.
Exactly. But the massive psychological problem arises when we adopt a modern capitalistic soul owner mindset.
Which is exactly what our culture trains us to do. Yeah. We look at our lives, our bank accounts, our degrees, our talents, and we say, "I built this. I am the master of my fate. I am the sole owner of my destiny."
Precisely. When humans act like sole owners rather than stewards, they break the covenant with the landowner. They step completely out of the commanded will. True faith requires putting the theoretical knowledge of God into practical action in the dirt of everyday life, while constantly recognizing that we are just managing resources that ultimately belong to Him.
And the irony here is beautiful. You would think that realizing you aren't the supreme ruler of your own life would feel restrictive. But Engelbrecht argues it actually leads directly to the third pillar rest.
The Sabbath rest.
Right, he spends a lot of time on walking in the rest of God. But just like he did with righteousness, he completely redefines the Sabbath.
He removes it from the realm of legalism. He says the Sabbath is no longer just a physical day of the week to be observed ceremonially, like ensuring you don't push elevator buttons on a Saturday or refusing to turn on a light switch.
Okay, so what is it?
Instead, the Sabbath is a perpetual spiritual embodiment found in the person of Jesus.
The psychological implication of this is staggering. Engelbrecht describes the Sabbath rest as ceasing from the frantic, anxiety-ridden efforts of the flesh and the world. Think about it. If you believe you are the sole owner of your life, you can never, ever rest. The entire burden of the universe is on your shoulders. If your business fails, you starve. If you make a wrong career move, your identity is destroyed. You have to constantly hustle, constantly defend your ego, constantly manipulate outcomes.
It is an exhausting way to exist, but if you are operating in alignment with a good sovereign landowner, you can actually rest.
Because it's not all on you.
Exactly. You do your work, you steward the land, but you sleep well at night knowing the landowner is ultimately responsible for the harvest.
He connects this failure to rest directly to modern mental health, which I thought was incredibly perceptive. He talks about the carnal Christian, someone who might theoretically believe in God, but who is still overly focused on earthly desires, status, and defending their own ego. Engelbrecht argues that a carnal believer becomes inherently unstable. They are driven entirely by fear. And because they are ruled by fear, they become susceptible to what he calls demonic strongholds, which we might understand today as crippling anxieties, addictions, toxic thought patterns, and deep depressions.
He is diagnosing the exact root of modern existential dread. When your mind is anchored to the temporary shifting sands of worldly success, you will always be terrified of losing it, because worldly success is inherently fragile.
Totally.
True peace, what the ancient Hebrew texts call shalom, only comes when the mind is renewed and aligned with the spirit, fully trusting the sovereign will. It is the deep psychological rest of knowing that the gravity of God's reality will hold you, even if you fail in your earthly tasks.
Okay, let's zoom out and look at the massive map we've traced so far. A person stands at the crossroads of modern life. They recognize the exhaustion of the byways and choose the ancient path. They journey through the blueprint of the tabernacle. They shed their ego at the bronze altar. They wash their mind daily at the laver. They move past the surface-level gifts and do the hard work of sanctification in the holy place.
Yes.
Finally, they step through the torn veil into the terrifying, raw presence of the Holy of Holies. They align their free will with God's commanded will, acting as a faithful vassal, and they enter this profound psychological and spiritual Sabbath rest.
It is complete transformation of the human architecture.
So the final question is, when a person successfully navigates all of that, what do they become? What does a person who has walked this ancient path look like in the modern world? This brings us to Engelbrecht's powerful conclusion, the way of the unveiled.
Engelbrecht draws heavily from a concept in 2 Corinthians 3.18, detailing what it means to live with an unveiled face. The historical context here is crucial.
So right, with Moses.
Exactly. In the Old Testament, when Moses would go into the tent to speak with God, his face would literally glow with so much residual glory that it terrified the Israelites. So Moses had to wear a physical veil over his face to hide the fading glory and protect the people from the intensity of the divine reflection.
Okay.
But the Apostle Paul in the New Testament argues that through Christ, the veil is permanently taken away.
And Engelbrecht takes this ancient metaphor and applies it to all the psychological and spiritual masks we wear today. Living unveiled means the absolute, unapologetic removal of the veil of religion.
Yes.
It means tearing off the veil of legalism, of dead church traditions, and most importantly, of self-righteousness. It is a call to terrifying, raw authenticity.
It is the ultimate rejection of spiritual hypocrisy. The unveiled person isn't pretending to be perfect. They aren't hiding behind religious jargon. And to illustrate what this gritty, authentic, unveiled life looks like, Engelbrecht uses some really striking cultural references that you absolutely wouldn't expect to find in a dense theological treatise.
Yeah, this part of the book is amazing. He pulls in quotes from U2's Bono, and he references the country music legend Johnny Cash.
It's brilliant.
He quotes Bono, specifically referencing the lyrics where Bono says he spoke in the tongues of angels, yet still hadn't found what I'm looking for. And then he points to Johnny Cash's famous song, Walk the Line.
Right.
And I really want to dig into this with you because he contrasts these massive, ecstatic, stadium-level spiritual experiences with a flawed guy and his guitar just quietly determining to walk the line. Why does he make that specific comparison?
It is a powerful, almost searing critique of modern charismatic performance within religion. Engelbrecht observes that in today's spiritual culture, people are addicted to chasing the spectacular.
The goosebumps.
Exactly. They want the emotional goosebumps. They want the stadium lights, the fog machines, the emotional highs, the supposed prophetic revelations. They want the spectacle of falling down in the spirit or speaking in tongues. But he uses the Bono reference to deliver a gut punch. You can have all those ecstatic, supernatural experiences and still be completely hollow inside. You can speak in the tongues of angels and still not actually know the person of God.
It echoes the Apostle Paul. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal.
Exactly. Engelbrecht is saying that all the religious pageantry, all the spiritual gifts, all the loud declarations mean absolutely nothing if a person cannot practically love like Jesus in their daily life.
Wow.
The unveiled are those who seek a raw, authentic relationship over religious theater. They don't need the stadium lights. They don't need to prove how spiritual they are on social media.
They are like Johnny Cash broken, acutely aware of their own imperfections, acknowledging their deep flaws, but determining in the quiet of their own heart to walk the line of the ancient path.
He writes that the unveiled actually embrace their brokenness. They are lions at heart who fight spiritual battles, but they don't fight them through arrogance or screaming on street corners.
No.
They fight through humility. They fight through offering forgiveness to those who hurt them. They walk the narrow way without any need for public recognition.
They intentionally decrease so that the presence of God can increase in their lives. He says they seek the cup of God, which often implies suffering, sacrifice, and serving others, rather than seeking the altars of silver and gold that represent worldly success and platform building.
These unveiled individuals are the ones who have actually made it into the Holy of Holies and stayed there. They aren't trying to impress anyone in the outer court anymore. They don't care about the religious metrics of success.
They are just there.
They are simply resting in the raw presence of the divine. And that, Engelbrecht concludes, is the ultimate destination of the ancient path. It is not about acquiring spiritual power, and it's certainly not about showing off your theological knowledge. It is about becoming a true, unveiled reflection of divine love in a profoundly dark and confusing world.
Wow. Okay, let's try to synthesize this massive journey we've taken today, because we have covered incredible philosophical and spiritual ground.
We really have.
We started by standing at the crossroads, realizing that our modern byways of consumerism, self-help, and ego are just leaving us burned out and anxious. We heard Engelbrecht's call to choose the ancient highway.
Right.
We unpacked the architecture of the tabernacle as an actual step-by-step psychological map for the soul moving from the bloody sacrifices of the outer court to the silent, terrifying intimacy of the inner sanctuary.
And the paradox of God's will.
Yes, we wrestled with the absolute intellectual tension between God's unbreakable sovereign will and our daily responsibility to his commanded will. And finally, we saw how dropping our religious and social masks allows us to live an unveiled life of true rest, walking the line with practical, gritty love.
It is a comprehensive, demanding framework for living. It doesn't offer easy shortcuts. It demands the surrender of everything you think you own, but it promises a profound, unshakable peace in return.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to address you, the listener, directly. Take a hard look at your own life, your own pursuits, your daily routines, and your anxieties. Are you stuck in the outer court of your endeavors?
It's a tough question.
Are you just checking boxes, doing the bare minimum to feel like a decent person, without ever pursuing real, terrifying depth? Are you fighting against the absolute gravity of the sovereign will in your life? because you stubbornly refuse to submit your own commanded choices?
Mm-hmm.
Are you sitting on a roof waiting for a supernatural helicopter when there is a highly practical rowboat sitting right in front of you?
And I want to leave you with a final lingering thought to mull over, building on everything Engelbrecht has outlined today. He posits that the physical tabernacle of the Old Testament, the bronze, the wood, the gold, the incense, was just a temporary shadow. It was a physical visual aid for an ancient people.
Okay.
The reality, he argues, is that your mind, your body, your spirit are now the living tabernacle. You are the permanent location of the Holy of Holies.
Wow.
If that is true, if the ultimate raw divine presence resides internally within you, what hidden rooms inside your own mind are you still keeping veiled, locked away, out of sheer fear that the ancient fire might burn away the modern ego you've worked so incredibly hard to build?
That is a question that will absolutely keep you up at night. The modern spiritual GPS might be broken, but the ancient map is sitting right there, waiting to be unfolded. Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today. Keep questioning, keep seeking the depths, and we'll see you next time.